Hello everyone, Lord here. Welcome back to Shadowverse. Today, we'll be doing something a bit different and talking about how the rotation ranked ladder meta has shaped up in the first week of the new Dawnbreak Nightedge expansion pack. We'll take a look at what people are playing, how those decks work on a very basic level, and why they seem to be so popular. Before we dive in, I'd like to give props to shadowverse.gamewith.jp and shadowlog.com for a lot of the information and numbers included here. Now, let's take a look. Top Dogs, Tier 1. As usual, there's quite a significant debate as to whether more decks should be here, but the two that have pretty unanimously been recognized as belonging to this tier are Midrange Swordcraft and Summit Havencraft. So why are they so popular and or powerful? Let's take a look at how they work and find out. Midrange Sword is a slower spin on the traditional aggressive sword builds. With the loss of most of their Storm followers, Sword has had to shift priorities to creating a sticky board rather than relying on self-sufficient endgame Stormers like Albert. Enter Arthur, Night King.
Clash in the name of glory!
This guy is the absolute core of the modern midrange sword archetype. His ability to come down and immediately fill the board with followers, both creating an immediate threat and significantly thinning your deck in a single card, is extremely valuable. In fact, most decks running him, and that is almost all sword decks mind you, specifically build around his 2 play points restriction in order to ensure that he will both always have 4 friends to bring along and that said followers are optimized for entering play via his effect. But even if those followers survive until the next turn, due to the cost limitation, most of them will have 1 or 2 points of power. How do you proceed to significantly threaten your opponent with such low impact followers, especially if your opponent puts down a big ward? Enter Sky Fortress. This follower that conveniently is able to come down on the turn following Arthur provides the perfect follow-up to his instant board creating ability. A significant buff effect to make even the smallest follower into an immediate threat, and a high-powered rush body to clear away any defensive measures, or simply allow you to maintain pressure by contesting the board by itself while your other followers attack directly. Being able to also bestow ward or give you card draw is just icing on the cake. As you may imagine, successfully landing the curve play of Arthur into Sky Fortress without significant contention by your opponent can and will lead to a very easy game over. Combining this very powerful late game swing with the plethora of extremely efficient sword early and mid game followers like Sky Commander Celia, Val's Magical Marksman, and Luminous Mage, all of which provide versatility, can easily populate the board, or simply allow for very favorable follower trading, is the reason why midrange sword is so highly regarded currently. Summit Havencraft is very much a standard, more controlling Haven deck that is centered around one card, Summit Temple. Very much a throwback to the core set's Archpriestess Lelia, this card provides a multitude of benefits. A permanent amulet that allows cards which require amulets to function, a cheap cyclable card that basically eliminates the drawback of drawing into multiple copies, and most importantly, the ability to make any high defense Havencraft follower significantly more valuable to the point of having to completely reevaluate most of them. All of this for 1 play point. Obviously, there's a bit of a learning curve with this card, as while your high defense followers may attack for a lot more with this in play, they still defend against attacks with their original power, and worse yet, become significantly less powerful once injured. That said, the deck highly values high defense followers, running things like Bejeweled Tortoise, that comes from Gemstone Carapace's last words, Serenian Hind, and of course Aether of the White Wing. And while all of those are very efficient and powerful followers, the real big boss of this deck is none other than Heavenly Knight.
From the heavens above, justice is delivered!
Looking at Haven's typical endgame cards, and barring Aegis from that consideration, this guy has it all. He protects you with ward, has high defenses to prevent being easily removed, and immediately assists you in getting control of the board without an evolution point, provided you have an amulet in play. And while all that might be good and fair when talking about any other amulet, once we consider Summit Temple, this card's power level increases dramatically. Rather than trading for board control, being able to utilize his Storm to immediately deal 7 or 9 with an evolution point damage to the opponent's face presents a very real endgame threat, especially as the card removes counter-aggression as a possible answer due to having Ward. Between Haven's very efficient draw and removal options, their strong mid-game presence with cards like Priest of the Cudgel and March Hare's Tea Time, and the powerful combination of Summit Temple plus Heavenly Knight as a hard-to-counter endgame finisher, it is not hard to see why many consider Summit Havencraft to be among the best rotation decks currently available. Contenders for the Throne, Tier 2. As you might imagine, this category is significantly more populated than the first. As such, I will keep my commentary about individual decks significantly more concise, as there is a lot of ground to cover. As usual, there's a lot of contention as to which decks belong here, so I'll be using a combination of Shadowlog data, information from GameWith, and a smidge of my personal experience playing games on the ladder to come up with the exact list. Also, please note that these are not sorted in any particular order. Mid-range Forestcraft. Forest's predominant deck type. It utilizes a plethora of cards that either generate a lot of tempo or allow for big swings, examples being Airbound Barrage, Insect Lord, Wood of Brambles, and Fashionista Nelka. It seeks to end the game with powerful finishers like Jungle Warden or the Wrath of Nature spell that Yggdrasil generates. The deck is quite solid and very consistent, making it a pretty reasonable contender for the top. Giant Chimera or Spells Runecraft. If you are familiar with the old Dimension Shift decks, this is very much what this is. The premise is simple: play an enormous amount of cheap or free spells while either Prophecy of Doom or Giant Chimera are in your hand, and then proceed to play them for either a one-turn kill or a very short lethal clock. There's nothing really fancy here. The deck has a hard-coded win condition that can eventually beat out any opponent. However, it requires a significant amount of turns to assemble that win condition, and the deck's board presence is very minimal. As such, pilots of this deck may often find themselves overwhelmed by more aggressive decks. So while inherently a good deck, this combo archetype struggles to compete for the top in metas that are not strongly leaning in favor of control decks. Ramp Dragon. If you've played Shadowverse, you should be familiar with the basis for this archetype. You play cards that give you more play points, and you use them to play expensive cards far earlier than you would otherwise. There's not much to say here except that this expansion, Dragon's preferred take on this build, has been to utilize many non-follower cards, a large chunk of which are board wipes, and build up towards Lindworm, or more specifically Iniquitous Lindworm, to finish off the opponent with. A solid build, however, once again favoring a more control-centric meta, which currently this isn't. Reanimate Shadowcraft. This deck's premise is actually very simple, but very interesting. In short, you're aiming to play Zeus as many times as possible, as early as possible. How? Simple! Put him into the graveyard using Gloomy Necromancer or Everdark Strix's Burial Rite effects, and then proceed to use powerful reanimate cards like Eternal Potion, Death Dragon Caller, or Sow Death Reap Life to bring him back. Utilizing his keyword combination, he can clear away threats, protect you quite efficiently, and deal direct damage immediately. The deck is very interesting and may feel borderline unfair if all of its effects line up. However, it completely relies on a single card, that being Zeus, as its win condition, and as such is extremely prone to simply bricking itself by not seeing him the whole game. Still being considered a contender for the top, despite this, is proof of the deck's enormous potential. Aegis Havencraft. Not much to say here, this is very much a standard Havencraft control shell centered around using the nearly untouchable Heavenly Aegis to close out games, provided they reach the end game. This archetype has been around since Aegis' inception and is, needless to say, quite potent, however, once again is significantly more suitable for control-centric metas, which, at least currently, this one is not. Holy Lion Havencraft. A brand new archetype from this expansion. Holy Lion centers around the use of Holy Lion Crystal, which generates more powerful followers the more times it is cast. Eventually, the deck seeks to generate Storm followers, which quickly end the game. While it has the potential for infinite value, the deck does require significant card and playpoint investment to realize its full potential, and between the lack of specific support cards for it and the presence of other very potent Havencraft builds, Holy Lion seems to have taken a back seat in terms of popularity, at least for now. Puppet Portalcraft, an old tier 3 archetype revitalized by this expansion's edition of Orcus Puppet Girl. Puppet Portalcraft utilizes cards which generate puppets and then uses those puppets in combination with either Orcus Puppet Girl or Vengeful Puppeteer Noah to present an endgame Storm win condition. While undeniably powerful, even with the addition of Orcus, this archetype suffers from lack of redundancy and is still forced to run good stuff cards which do not contribute to its main game plan. While initially touted as the go-to archetype for Portalcraft, the hype for puppets seems to have been significantly tempered as people realized that a single card could not fix this inherent problem. Mid-range Portalcraft, the old go-to archetype for Portalcraft. While this is still being debated, it may soon become just that once again. In essence, this deck relies heavily on artifact cards, mostly Analyzing and Ancient, to both generate very high tempo turns and to feed into artifacts destroyed, cards like Magna Legacy and, more importantly, Saphira Synthetic Beast. With artifact generators being much more plentiful and efficient in comparison to puppet generators, and artifacts generally being significantly better standalone in comparison to puppets, mid-range Portalcraft is not only slowly making its way back to the top of Portalcraft decks, but also to the list of possible contenders against meta decks like Midrange Sword, as the board control enabled by Acceleration has shown to be a reasonably effective countermeasure. I wouldn't be surprised to see this archetype rise up to the top places of Tier 2 or even become Tier 1 once the meta settles. Outliers, Tier ? This is our final tier and it encompasses other decks I have personally seen or are present in significant numbers in the data. Most of these are archetypes which were popular during previous expansions and are still being played, but have fallen out of favor with general theory crafting for one reason or another. Usually it's a lack of support, however some are here simply due to the presence of a much more consistent or powerful archetype in the same craft. Let's take a very brief look. Neutral Runecraft, rune deck that relies on a plethora of neutral-centric interactions, has received very little support after Wonderland Dreams. Key cards, Word Wielder Ginger and Felice Leonardian Mage. Burn Runecraft, rune deck centered around using direct damage spells to burn the opponent's health down. Has been a tier 1 deck frequently in the past, mostly down here due to lack of new support. Key cards, Wizardess of Oz, and basically every Runecraft tool that deals direct damage. PDK, that is Prime Dragon Keeper Dragoncraft. Dragon deck revolving around the use of the card of the same name. It's an unusually aggressive for Dragoncraft playstyle that was considered tier 1 in the past, before Prime Dragon Keeper itself was nerfed. While murmurs of it coming back have been going around, most players prefer to stick to the much more consistent and well-supported ramp archetype, at least for now. Vengeance Bloodcraft, blood deck that aims to quickly enter Vengeance and take advantage of a plethora of effects enabled by it. Lack of support and general risk associated with a low health total hold it back significantly. Key cards, Belphegor and Dark Airjammer, among many others. Aggro/Bat Bloodcraft, blood deck that only wants to quickly deal direct damage. With the advent of Old Blood King and a few other tribal-esque support cards, the archetype has basically shifted over to Forest Bats, which seems to be the most efficient take on aggro in this craft, mostly held back by Bloodcraft losing a disproportionately large number of staple cards with the addition of the rotation format. Mid-range Shadowcraft, shadow deck that basically plays like aggro, but has cards like Demon Lord Ector and Underworld Ruler Aisha to help close out the game in the later turns. Pretty much the go-to archetype for shadow players not running Reanimate. I wouldn't be surprised if this deck makes a resurgence, especially after in the past it has time and time again proven just how resilient to meta shakeups it can be. And that covers most of the notable decks or archetypes we have seen as of the first week of this expansion. Did you hear the deck you're currently laddering with? Are you annoyed that I didn't mention some more fringe archetypes like Hinterland Ghoul? Let me know in the comments. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, I've been Lord, and this has been Shadowverse. Thanks for watching.